These definitions like LCP, FID, CLS are rather confusing.
LCP is page speed, first input delay, FID is performance, CLS, cumulative layout shift, is frustration.
Core Web Vitals is not only about the ranking, speed, sales.
It's about your real users, your real audience. In the end, it isn't rocket science, but looking at your background, it might sound like some futuristic metrics for sure.
Hey everyone, today we'll talk about one of the most significant Google updates, Core Web Vitals, and what it means for your e-commerce business. In this video, we will continue to decrypt the meaning behind each metric, explain the best optimization techniques, and how poor optimization can impact your business. Start May 2021. Earlier, we published more general and helicopter view content on Google Update, and now today we are going to dive into some techie details. And who we? My name is Vladimir and I'm the Business Development Officer at GoMage. We are the Magento development company with a mission to create e-commerce experience that can be much better or as good as offline. And I'm here today with Erwin Hoffman, an expert in Google Core Web Vitals optimization. And while I'll talk about the update from a business point of view, Erwin will dive into the technical details of this kind of optimization and share some unique details that you won't find anywhere offline. So, Erwin, I am really glad to see you such an expert as a guest on our YouTube channel. Could you tell our viewers a few words about yourself and your experience, which was started back in 2003?
Yeah, well, talking about myself might be the hardest part today as I'm, well, just a developer, but let's take a shot. Let's try to introduce myself. I started off as a developer in, well, like you said before, 2004. And I basically rolled into the consultancy activities from a technical PageSpeed perspective. As I tried a lot of optimizations and recommendations, Google recommendations within our own products. And nowadays, for a few years already, I am basically helping e-commerce merchants, but also development agencies to optimize themselves, in short.
You have to be the really good expert in this particular sphere. And let's start from the basics, because I feel these definitions like LCP, FID, CLS are rather confusing for many people. They sound like a cryptic message from the matrix, that we all need to figure out. And with all my respect for the giants, I believe they could have come up with something easier for business people to understand. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it might be a bit of, well, in the end, it isn't rocket science, but looking at your background, it might sound like some futuristic metrics for sure. And it's also even a bit, hard to grasp, hard to understand, I guess, because some metrics are used in field data, but aren't used in lab data. And total blocking time and time to interactive are really lab data metrics and not field data metrics. So it might be a bit confusing for sure, depending on your, well, on your own background, if you're a developer or already doing a bit of programming, for example.
Mhm.
So yeah, it might be a bit hard to understand for sure. Yeah.
Well, it's important to mention that Google didn't take these metrics out of the thin air anyway. The good thing is that they actually did research to identify what's important for users when visiting the websites. So with Core Web Vitals, Google kind of forces businessmen to have a better online experience for all of us. And I have the question for you. If you were asked to describe Core Web Vitals metric in one word, what would you go for?
In just one word.
But you can explain it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would be able to explain each metric in one word. For example, LCP is page speed, First input delay, FID, is performance. And for example, CLS, cumulative layout shift, is frustration, in such a way that layout shifts aren't good for user experience. When you are reading a bit of text and an advertisement is popping in, video ad or whatever,
Okay.
then the text would shift, and then you would have to start reading and at the point where you ended up before the shift happened, for example. But also when you wanted to add something to the cart, pressing on a button, and the button shifts or is being pushed down by other contents, it's not a good user experience. It might even frustrate some users out there, and well, some users might even throw their phone out of the window, for example. So layout shift really is about user frustration, and largest control paint, for example, really is a page speed metric. And first input delay is often impacted by JavaScript. So it's really a performance metric. So basically, it's all about user experience, obviously. So it's called page speed insights, but by now it might have been called, it could have been called user experience insights. And they basically bundled several user experience metrics into, well, core web vitals.
By the way, in the most cases, if I'm not mistaken, companies measure their Core Web Vitals score with Google Lighthouse. And can people trust this tool? Can we do that?
Well, there is a lot of difference. There's a lot of difference in the results you will get when you would do a lab data, like just a running Lighthouse or running PageSpeed Insights, and obviously between the field data, so how real users out there are experiencing your website or web shop. For example, a PageSpeed Insights lab data test is done on a Motorola Moto 4G device on a 3G internet connection. They just recently switched to HTTP2 testing, so they will then load all resources over an HTTP2 connection. So that might already improve your lab data score. But if your users are on a, well, maybe the latest device and always on a Wi-Fi connection or 4G connection, you might get a 22 performance score, for example, and end up actually passing Core Web Vitals. The other way around is also possible. You might have an optimal page speed score, but if your users out there, your real audience, is often on as well, maybe a legacy device and a slow internet connection, then you might not pass Core Web Vitals, although you had a perfect page speed score, for example. So, and that's also the reason why Google introduced Core Web Vitals. It's about your real users, your real audience. So you have to optimize for your, well, basically you have to optimize. You should be able to have a perfect user experience for at least 75% of all page views. Not 75% of your visitors, but 75% of all your page views.
Okay, very interesting. Well, let's try to dive into more tech details with all the parts of Core Web Vitals. Firstly, I think that we should talk about the LCP, which goes for largest contentful paint. And in simple words, as far as I understand, it's the time it takes for a website to display the largest piece of the content. And in most cases, images are the heaviest elements. And according to Google, the best time for the LCP metric is about 2.5 seconds or lower.
Yeah, it obviously it does start with a perfect time to first byte. So if your time to first byte or your server-side rendering time, or maybe your host is bad, then it would also impact all other page speed metrics like largest contentful paint, first contentful paint. The best largest contentful paint we achieved is real-time data, like field data is 1.1 seconds. But once again, yeah, it depends if you've got an image or if you've got a text. And if a text node, like a paragraph or a heading, is your LCP, then font swapping might impact your LCP. And if it's an image, then you should not lazy load your above default image, for example, because you are basically introducing a bit of a delay for the browser. So above default images shouldn't be lazy loaded. And I recently published a post on LinkedIn where we actually enlarged the LCP image to full viewport widths, like width and height. So 100% width, 100% height of the viewport. And as a result, the Lighthouse won't see such image as the LCP. So your LCP might actually improve when enlarging your image. And the reason is when you've got a full viewport hero image, then basically Google thinks that such image is just for decorative purposes instead of meaningful purposes. So a product image, you won't enlarge a product image, but you might actually enlarge a hero image, for example. So it really depends on the context as well.
Everyone is talking about the images, servers, JavaScript, and CSS optimization. So which one is the best to start with? And are there any secret techniques for LCP optimization that you could share with us?
Yeah, well, secret techniques also depend on the platform, I guess. It might depend on the platform as well. And the time to first byte should be optimal to start with. So you should have an optimal host which fits your platform. You might not want to pick a web WordPress hosting when you've got a Magento shop, obviously. And yeah, it then really depends on how the platform is rendering the largest element. For example, on most Magento web shops, the main product image is rendered using JavaScript. So it's basically delaying the detection of the image itself, the file path of the image, but also the rendering of the image. So when you depend on JavaScript for rendering your product image, you basically introduce some delays towards the largest contentful paint. So the best approach towards improving your largest contentful paint is at least server-side rendering the first page hit within the new session.
We are talking for any kind of e-commerce websites because usually they are full of images. And is there anything an image-rich website could do to have a good LCP score with all that techniques?
Yeah, well, the LCP is basically about the image within the viewport, and often, like once again on a product detail page, the product image will be the largest contentful paint, and you are better off lazy loading all other images, and you can then basically use, well, as many images as you like. Obviously, you should apply other best practices as well, like responsive images, but images alone don't really have to be an impact on performance. Some SEO specialists might claim that images will impact your performance score or real user experience, but it's not really the case because CSS is render blocking, JavaScript is render blocking. However, images aren't render blocking. So if you implement lazy loading for your images, and obviously don't use a 2 megabytes image for your product detail page, then images really don't have to impact your performance at all. They are often impacting the onload event. And often we, as developers, we attach all kind of JavaScript onto the onload event. So yeah, then our performance might be impacted because of the way we implement JavaScript, but it isn't images which impact performance. It really is JavaScript. So then you're better off lazy loading the rest of your images.
Well, thank you, Erwin. That was really insightful, and that's from now our viewers know about the LCP and its optimization. And it's really time to move on to the second metric, first import delay, and to the time it takes for the website to respond to our actions. Like, remember the situations when you click something on and nothing happens on the page. At such moments, I want to smash the mouse upon the wall.
Yeah, very plainly, we should basically limit the amount of subsequent JavaScript. So when a lot of JavaScript gets executed in a row, blocking the main thread, and in the basis, browsers are single threaded. So if we've got a lot of JavaScript which are blocking the main thread, then this might cause a first input delay. And not only a first input delay, but maybe also a second input delay. However, yeah, Lighthouse or Chrome browsers are basically stop measuring the first input delay at, well, like the metric already tells us, at the first input. But yeah, your description of the first input delay is quite correct. It's about when the browser is able to respond to user interaction. Sometimes some SEO specialists think that it's about how soon a user can start interacting with a web page, but that's something we don't know. A user might start interacting with the web page at any moment, and it then is about how fast the browser can respond to the user interaction.
Well, that means that Google recommends, also, by the way, Google recommends the FID to be 100 milliseconds or lower. And if the website visitors wait longer, well, they are unlikely to become the customers. And are there any statistics showing how many potential customers an e-commerce website can lose because of problems of FID?
I don't know any statistics from the top of my head. I do know that there is a website, WPOstats.org, where they share use cases. And Google also started sharing use cases on web.dev. But yeah, it might lead to user frustration. And once again, one user might get frustrated quite soon. When I'm auditing, then I'm very patient because I want to know what's happening. But when I'm not doing any audit, then I might be a bit impatient myself as well. So it will lead to user frustration, and it will increase, obviously, it will increase bounce rate as well.
Okay, well, FID optimization is actually a long process, as far as I understand, since it correlates with the website performance. And by the way, is it true that FID optimization comes down to minimization of JavaScript usage? Are there any other aspects that can impact FID results, Erwin?
Yeah, it is JavaScript to start with. And obviously, when you are able to reduce the amount of JavaScript, it will also improve the chance of a first input delay, because it's not very likely that a first input delay will happen. At this very moment, of all 8 million tracked websites by Chrome User Experience Report, it's only 12% that isn't passing the first input delay metric. So that's not a lot. To give an example, some Wix websites might actually have a bad first input delay because of the way they render a web page. They use a lot of JavaScript. And when you start to interact with the hamburger menu on a mobile device, for example, then the browser might respond quite late. And obviously that's a first input delay. And it's only an input delay, like you said before, when it's always an input delay. But if it's exceeding the 100 milliseconds threshold, then you aren't passing cool web vitals anymore. And it's not only, by the way, it's not only about JavaScript, even CSS rendering work. So even work in a browser to draw those pixels to your screen could impact the performance, as that's also blocking the main thread.
Okay. By the way, in one of your posts you wrote, let me read that. If you do animations the wrong way, it will block browser behavior. Not good for performance, and it might even become a part of hashtag Core Web Vitals in the future. What does it mean done in the wrong way, and how to prepare for possible future?
That's a good question, and also part of the CSS rendering work. For example, if you want to animate a sticky header, and you want to make the header smaller as soon as the user scrolls to the bottom of the page, or any other animation, but a sticky header is a good example. and often such header is made a bit smaller, then you might animate the padding or animate the height of the element, of the header element. However, animating the height or padding property, CSS padding or height property, is done on the main thread as well, is done on the CPU. And when you block the main thread, then no other tasks can be performed by the browser. So if some JavaScript kicks in, then it might actually impact the CSS animation if you animated the height or the padding properties. So you are basically better off animating other properties. And there are two CSS properties which aren't performed on the CPU, but are offloaded to the GPU, the graphical card of the computer. And as it's performed on the offloaded to the graphical card, it isn't on the main thread anymore, and it won't block other tasks. And it also works the other way around. If you've got a lot of JavaScript going on, and you've got an animation going on at the same time, the animation might be a bit, bit flaky, like, it might feel like when you're gaming and you've got a lot of latency, then there are a lot of delays in the frames. And it also works that way. When you're animating an element using padding or height properties, then it's done on at 30 frames per second. And the good way of animating is using the translate property, the translate and opacity property. And using the translate property, you can move elements or scale elements. So you can basically perform the same CSS animations, but they are then just offloaded to the GPU totally for free and not blocking the main thread anymore. And a bonus point is those animations are then performed over 60 frames per second. So the animation is also way smoother, and it is possible that CSS animations will become part of the Core Web Vitals in the future. I don't know. Nobody knows. Only Google knows. But it is possible that it happens within the next year.
By the way, many people believe that JavaScript bundling is a great way to optimize JS code. Is it true, or can it do the opposite to the website?
I often try to say that your, for example, your render blocking bottleneck is as big as your biggest resource. So if you bundle all CSS or all JavaScript, then the waiting time for the browser also becomes longer. So it's better to split those resources. Obviously, you don't want to end up with maybe 50 resources at the same time. But nowadays, as we've got HTTP2, it isn't the best practice anymore to bundle your JavaScript.
The last but not least thing I would like to talk about is cumulative layout shift. Regarding the CLS, Google measures any shifts that happen while a website is loading. Such situations happen because new elements appear on the page and move the already loaded ones. So does Google consider all the website shifts as a negative factor?
Fair question, because no, it doesn't consider all layout shifts as an impact towards your CLS score. However, there are some nuances to be aware of, and one of them is when a user clicks on a button, like when you've got an FAQ with a lot of questions and answers below those questions, then obviously the answer will become visible as soon as the user clicks on the question. So the user had a user interaction, and then a layout shift happened because the answer of the question collapsed. But because there was a user interaction, it isn't considered as a CLS. However, there's also a when the layout shift happens after 500 milliseconds, then the browser thinks that the layout shift was unexpected. So if you use a lot of JavaScript to perform an action such as collapsing an element, then you should, or maybe even open your hamburger menu, then it should happen within 500 milliseconds.
So does it mean that store owners not need to sacrifice any visual effects for CLS? And what would you recommend for Magento store owners to meet those CLS requirements?
Yeah, obviously, I would advise everyone to meet those requirements. Like you said before, they already started testing those metrics, those new metrics, although they were introduced in May 2020. And they already started measuring and researching those metrics as of November 2019. And yeah, who likes moving elements? Who likes user frustration? So yeah, I would advise to meet those thresholds of all those individual metrics.
Perfect, perfect. By the way, I remember in one of your posts, you mentioned a cookie notice as one of the elements that cause that kind of layout shifts. And can you give any kind of recommendations for optimizing such elements?
Yeah. Once again, it depends on how you implement a cookie notice. In some cases, it's an overlay, which is on top of your very own homepage styling, for example, or whatever page. And you still see some cookie notices which are sliding in from the top and pushing all contents down. And if that happens, then it's a layout shift, as the main contents of your web page, maybe your header, heading 1, and the product page below the heading 1, all pushed down because of the cookie notice, sliding in. So that's an obvious layout shift. And there are also some other non-obvious layout shifts, like when a cookie notice is actually an overlay, but I think it's cookie.info, if I'm correct. And it's often animating, it's often sliding in from the bottom. However, it is sliding in using, I think they are using the top property or bottom property, which is one of those properties which is performed on the CPU. Once again, talking about CSS animations. So they should have used transform instead of using top property. And this is a bit weird because it isn't really a visual layout shift because it's not pushing other contents away. But when you've got a slideshow or when you've got a cookie notice, which is animated using the, left, right, or margin properties or top or bottom properties, then Google thinks, or I should say Google Chrome thinks it's a layout shift. So it's a bit of a false positive, which might actually impact your CLS in real life. So that's a shame, it's a bummer, which you then have to address by using the GPU CSS animations like transform.
Any other things you would like to add regarding the CLS?
Yeah, what I sometimes see happening as well, although it might not be one of the first things you think of, is a sticky header. I've seen some cases when doing audits where the header is made sticky after the user scrolled a few pixels, and then the header becomes position relative to position sticky or position fixed, and it might cause your body to your main element in your HTML source to move to the top, the same height as the header was, as the header is now not part of the document flow anymore. So if I then would scroll up and down, then I would basically impact the CLS by a lot. So I've seen cases where Lighthouse said there was no layout shift because Lighthouse won't be simulating any scrolling behavior. But in real life, the CLS was about 80%, so quite high. So sticky headers often can be a bottleneck as well.
Okay, really interesting. Well then, I think that we have covered all the three metrics and their optimizations. But the main takeaway for me is that Core Web Vitals is not only about the ranking, speed, sales. It's also about winning customers' hearts and saving their time and making their experience enjoyable. So, do you have any words for those people regarding the importance of them optimization their websites?
Um, well, yeah, in the end, it's about real user experience. It's about your real audience. And I've heard some people say that Google is changing all the time. They are changing their metrics or they are changing Lighthouse, which is true, by the way. But they aren't changing Lighthouse to bully developers or bully product owners. They are, yeah, changing Lighthouse to get a better understanding of what really impacts user experience in the first place, and then enable developers to get an idea of the metrics which are important towards user experience.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Irvin, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and where you can find useful videos for e-commerce store owners. By the way, check the Irvin social media accounts and you'll find a ton of useful information. Stay tuned for new videos.